up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 370. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources. And joining me on the line from frigid Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. LSV, how are you, sir?
I'm doing all right, Marshall.
Hanging in there, buddy?
Something like that.
You know, we've got we might be competing with you on the coldness scale here. And we're not used to it in Seattle. Everybody's complaining, and I'm definitely part of everybody. But it's like it got below freezing.
Yeah, I mean,
do you feel bad for me? Or?
You don't have multiple feet of snow on the ground. But...
No, we don't have any snow. Jeez, what are you talking about? No, it just got really cold. I got a coat for Christmas, so I've been wearing that. Yeah, that's my life. So we've got we're kind of back into the swing of things as we start looking forward to Aether Revolt, which is of course the next set coming out in just a week and a half time here, and that means of course that we're getting right back into the swing of things. And next week is our set review show, but leading up to that, we like to do a rules and mechanics show, which is what we're doing here, as well as our exclusive Limited Resources preview cards, which we're going to be discussing after we talk about the mechanics. Now, the reason why we do this is because the mechanics are super important, right? They're one of the overarching themes to the set, and they're going to dictate a lot of what, you know, Luis, you and I care about, which is the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts of this set, not just the overall flavor. Oh, there's a revolt. We're like, whatever. I want to know, you know, how do these mechanics affect the set? And we're going to take, you know, this show to kind of get that out of the way now, so that when we do the set review next week, we can just focus on the cards and assume that you, good listener, already know what the mechanics are and how they work. Before we get into everything, of course, I want to talk about our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com. One of the best combos. It's got to be one of the sweetest combos ever, right?
It's one of the original combos.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that kind of
alpha.
Yeah, I mean, that puts it. I mean, I wonder how many like combos like that there are in alpha.
Well, you got a Time Vault, Animate Artifact, and Still Energy as a classic.
There's another one, but that didn't quite roll off the tongue as well as Channel Fireball.
No, I think Channel Fireball is actually the original 2-card combo.
Yeah, I think it is too. Man, I've been playing a lot of Channel. Did you know that Owen thinks that Channel's the best card in the current iteration of the Vintage Cube on Magic Online?
I did.
Yeah. Do you agree?
Yeah, I haven't played as much of this Vintage Cube, but Channel is just messed up with any of the Eldrazi or like any of the just big colorless cards. You know,
he also likes Time Walk and what's that stupid guy called? The one that lets you buy back your
Soulfire
spells.
Grandmaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a sweet combo too.
Yeah, he's been doing that. Anyway, back to business. ChannelFireball.com, your place to go for everything you need related to Magic on the internet, including awesome free content. You can show up, read articles, watch videos and stuff by some of the best players in the world, and really help up your game, or maybe just be entertained, whatever it is that you're looking for. Also, you can buy the cards that you need. If you have some singles that you need for a deck, they're going to have it in stock. They're going to get it shipped out to you quickly in good shape. They're going to stand by their product. If you need sealed product, like if you want to pre-order stuff from Aether Revolt, you can go on Channel Fireball, put in your pre-orders. Once they're ready to ship, once they're allowed to, they'll put it in the mail, and you're going to get it as soon as possible. Get those beautiful new shiny packs in your hand and start cracking them with your friends, doing some booster drafts. You can get all of that at channelfireball.com. The show is also brought to you by you, the Patreon, via the Patreon. That's right. You go to patreon.com/limited resources and check it out. You get a bunch of cool perks, and it's real easy to get set up. You can quit anytime. You can put a monthly cap on, and you can change your amount anytime. It's fully up to you. There's no commitments or anything like that. You don't have to sign a form or commit to some time frame or whatever. It's if your budget changes, no worries. You can lower it, you can raise it, you can quit, anything that you want. It's completely up to you over on the Patreon. And just by being a patron, you get access to a bunch of cool stuff. One of them is you get your name put in for the giveaways. And I've been doing a bunch of these. I got another one to give away here in just a minute. And also the question of the week. You also get access to some early posts. If you move your way up the chain, you can even get unedited versions of the show and stuff like that too. So pretty cool stuff over there at Patreon. Thank you so much, by the way, for all of you that do support us. It means the world to us. So let's do the giveaway. This time I've got a Duel Decks Phyrexia versus the Coalition. Who do you got in that fight, Luis?
I have actually
Negator or
So this is kind of random, but this is one of the few dual decks I've actually played.
Oh, really?
Yes, and I'm going to go with Phyrexia.
This is really weird.
Jace versus Chandra too. Those are the two that I played.
I think I'm giving one of those away soon too. I've also got a Dragons versus maybe Knights. I got a couple other ones.
Yeah, it's Dragons versus Knights. That one I haven't played. I'm not a dual deck test exactly.
You know what's really funny is that when I had Owen on, I gave away a dual decks and he's like, "Oh yeah, I've totally played a lot of that one." Like what? Yeah. Like I've got two of the best Magic players in the history of the game on the show within a 3-week span, and somehow both of you have played the random dual deck that I've put up. I don't know how that happened.
You don't become a great Magic player without honing your dual deck skills.
All right, I'll tell you who is going to be able to hone their Phyrexia versus the Coalition dual decks. It is our supporter, Justin St. John from Richmond, Virginia. Thank you so much, Justin, for your support. I'm going to be putting this in an envelope and shipping it out to you in the coming week or so. Thanks a lot. And again, I'll be giving away more stuff coming up soon as well. And if you want to get your name in the hat for that, you can be a patron any level too. You can be, $1 show, whatever it is. And you'll be in there for that as well. I mentioned the question of the week. This is, I think, one of the really cool things about a site like Patreon is that it's not just simply a monetization tool. They also give you neat ways that you can interact with your listeners. And one of them is I will set up a thread that is accessible only to patrons who can post in it, and they can post questions for the question of the week. This one comes from Adam Hoffman, who says, "Hey guys, so I'm probably among the worst Magic players in your listenership." He says, "It's okay, someone has to be. But I recently made a play that made me realize I'd leveled up. I used the -1/-1 on Subtle Strike on my own creature to get under a Sky Whaler shot." He says, "There's no way I would have thought of that a year ago. What are some of the plays you two have made that you're most proud of and or helped you realize you'd leveled up?" And I had a couple that came to mind. I think a lot of them are along the same vein of what Adam was referring to, where you're doing an unorthodox thing, right? How often do you point the -1/-1 on Subtle Strike at your own creature? It's very rare. It's not something that comes up often, but it can be a game-breaking play. I had one play where I had a Grave Titan out, and I think it was going to be exiled. I think it was being targeted with like a path or something like that. And I had a Whip of Erebos, and I realized that I should use my own removal spell to kill my own Grave Titan, which felt very strange, but it was much more valuable to me in the graveyard. And because my Whip of Erebos, gave my creatures lifelink and stuff, getting a bunch more zombies and a big hit in was a big deal. And I was playing against an aggressive deck, and I decided, nope, I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm going to kill my own Grave Titan. I did that, and ended up being the play that won me the game. But that's just an example. I have a lot of them like that, where it's looking beyond the normal heuristics of a given card. Do you have anything? I mean, Luis, you've been playing for so long, at a high level. Do you have anything that came to mind for Adam's question?
The example that I think is best for me is actually my second Pro Tour ever, Pro Tour Philadelphia. It was Champions Block Constructed. Ooh. And I had Sensei's Divining top out. And so I knew my top 3 cards, and I knew they weren't going to keep me from losing. I was gonna die to my opponent's creature next turn.
Okay.
I cast Cranial Extraction on myself. So that is name a card, exile all copies of that card from your deck in your hand. And clearly you only intend to cast it on your opponent, but actually Cranial Extracted myself to shuffle with top out. Also, I just chose Kodama's Reach because I didn't want to draw that card. So it just took 3 dead Kodama's Reaches out of my deck.
Oh, that's smart.
I mean, I lost the game still, but it was my opponent, and the reason I remember it, my opponent afterwards like, wow, that was a really sweet play. And I was just like, yeah, that play was very different than any play I've made before, but it's kind of like pointing removal at your own creature, right? You point a Cranial Extraction at my own face just for the shuffle ability, but it's the sort of thing, like you said, where the key is thinking about how to use your cards outside the normal realm. And that is where a lot of these out of the box plays come from.
Yeah. And you see those also, another way that this comes up that I think hits on a different vein than this one is thinking about things in terms of for example, let's say you've scryed a lot and you've got, the bottom cards of your library, right?
Yeah,
and then
if your bottom 4 cards are bad.
yeah, like if your bottom 4 cards are cards you don't want and you have the option to shuffle your library or not, like let's say with a fetch land, this comes up all the time in Modern, right? Where, maybe you've scryed cards to the bottom, but you've got a fetch land and now you're doing this calculation of, well, how much better is it for me if I thin a land out of my deck versus recirculate 5 blanks, right? Like I think that is, your average player, your beginning, even your intermediate level player just doesn't, that just does not come into that equation is just not, in their brain at all. And,
right.
I think when you start thinking in those terms as well is a good idea that you've probably leveled up. Thank you, Adam, for the question. And you're probably not the worst player in our listenership.
No, statistically, that's just like highly unlikely.
Right. We have a very large listenership. There's got to be somebody worse. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to our main topic, Luis, the rules and mechanics overview for Aether Revolt. So there's a couple of things that we should get out of the way at first. First off, there are returning mechanics, both energy and then it's not so much a mechanic, but something new. Vehicles are both back. Of note, we'll hit on this again a little bit, but Fabricate's not. There are not Fabricate cards.
People have stopped fabricating and started revolting.
Yes, exactly. And that brings us, of course, so we'll keep that in mind, right? There are energy cards. It works the same. Go ahead.
The implications here are that energy cards, you're still going to find plenty of energy sinks and energy creators. And that's just like kind of intrinsic to how energy works because it needs specific cards. Like you can take Fabricate out and the cards of Fabricate still play great. If energy was only in one of the two sets, the energy cards would get so much worse if they were just one pack of Kaladesh.
So you're not surprised to see that then?
No, I think you're kind of priced into seeing energy again. Not that it's a bad mechanic, but it's not the kind of mechanic that works in one of 3 packs.
Right. And vehicles being kind of a shiny new permanent type or whatever, you're not surprised to see those carry over either. Right.
That's not necessary from a gameplay standpoint like energy was, but it is still just, vehicles are new and they're exciting and they're like one of the big sellers of this world. So I think that vehicles make sense to come back to.
Okay. So that brings us, of course, to our new mechanics. We've got 2 of them. Okay. So we're going to start off with Revolt. Now, again, the goal for this is to get you comfortable enough with the new mechanic so that you know a couple of the corner cases and what the mechanic does and how it works fundamentally. We've kind of hit a middle ground here where we try to give you the big picture view with a few exceptions and not go, we used to go super, super deep on these, but it didn't feel like it was super useful. So you're getting kind of the middle ground now. So Revolt is an ability word that notes when X has happened, something else happens as well. Ability words are these ones that are in italics and then have a dash after them. And, we should probably mention, I don't think we've ever really gone over what an ability word is or how it works as far as Magic goes, but these are things like landfall or delirium, as opposed to things like first strike or flying. And the difference is simple. With a card like first strike or flying, if I walk up to you and I say, this card has first strike, or all your creatures with first strike get something, right? You know what first strike means once you've learned it. You know what flying means once you've learned it. And you don't need to know anything else other than flying. With these ability words, it's a little bit different. Cards, again, like Delirium, Landfall, Revolt in this case, they denote that as long as some requirement has been met, then something happens. But what they don't say is what happens. The thing that's the same about all of them is the requirement. So Landfall is you've played a land this turn, right? Simple. Delirium is you have 4 different four different card types in your graveyard. Okay, as long as you've met that, something else happens. And with Revolt, the different thing is if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn. So that's what Revolt means. If it says Revolt, it's always going to have the text, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, comma, something. And then the something is going to be a bonus for you. And it's going to come in many different forms. Okay. So let's start off with a couple of examples. Go ahead.
A little bit clarification is ability words will basically always explain exactly what happens. So the ability word has no intrinsic meaning. Like the shorthand is yes, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn. But like some cards say when this enters the battlefield, then look for your Revolt trigger. Some say like when the spell resolves, look for your Revolt trigger. So
yes,
basically ability words tie the card together, all the cards together, so you know, and you can kind of skip the part that you have already learned. But if the first time you're encountering an ability word, like it'll always just explain exactly what it does. Whereas first strike, there's a lot of cards that have first strike that don't say what first strike does.
Yes, totally. And unless you're like core setting or whatever. So also, by the way, Revolt can come on apparently any type of card. I don't, creatures, instants, sorceries, probably artifacts. So, we'll keep an eye on that as well. But I got a couple of examples just to get it in a little more concrete, and then we'll go through a little bit more of the nitty gritty. So the first one is called Decommission, and it's 2 and a white for an instant. It's common. It says destroy target artifact or enchantment. So that's what the card does. That's your baseline. Then it says Revolt. So again, that means if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, you gain 3 life. So for shorthand, I would say Revolt, you gain 3 life. So again, that Revolt doesn't have anything to do with life gain specifically. It's just for decommission. Another example is called Silkweaver Elite, which is 2 and a green for a 2/2 elf archer. It's a creature with reach. It's also common. And it says Revolt. When it enters the battlefield, and then here's the Revolt text, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, draw a card. So there's a couple of examples for what Revolt can do for you and how they can pay you off. In one, we've got a creature that draws you a card when it enters the battlefield if you've got Revolt. And in another, we've got an instant that gives you a modest life gain boost if you've got Revolt. So it's pretty straightforward, right? There's nothing super crazy about it. You're getting this baseline effect for the card, but then you have this opportunity for a bonus if you meet the requirement of having had a permanent you control leave the battlefield this turn. And the way it works is pretty straightforward as well. It looks back through the current turn to see if a permanent left the battlefield while it was under your control. That's what it does. Some examples of things that can happen to meet the requirement, just a few of them, is your creature dying. It's left the battlefield to go to the graveyard. Your enchantment or artifact getting destroyed. Any permanent getting returned to your hand, for example. Somebody shuffles something that you controlled into your library. That works too. If you sacrifice an artifact, like we've seen the implements, there's a cycle of these sort of cheap artifacts that are meant to be sacrificed in many cases, and that will trigger Revolt or will meet the requirements for Revolt. If somebody puts a permanent on top of your library, well, that left the battlefield, and that will count as well. A small note on that is that it doesn't actually care if you own the permanent. It's just that you controlled it and then it left the battlefield from your control. So an example that I thought of for the set would be if you played Confiscation Coup, which remember there is still one pack of Kaladesh, so you could, an opposing creature, but then your opponent bounced it back. Of course, it would go back to their hand because it goes to their owner's hand, but you still met the requirement for Revolt because you controlled it and it left the battlefield. So pretty straightforward, right, Luis?
It is. It's kind of an expanded Morbid from original Innistrad.
Yeah, that's what it reminded me of too.
It says if a creature died this turn. So it's expanded the definition to include any kind of permanent and anything that happened, like you said, whereby it leaves the battlefield. So there are definitely more ways to trigger this. I do think it's going to play. It's going to play in many ways similar to Morbid, but the additional ways to trigger it are going to be relevant, especially as you even got to preview the cycle of implements that help fuel Revolt here by giving you like outs to sacrifice cheap artifacts.
Right. And we'll probably keep our eye out for very cheap or even free ways to sacrifice artifacts or creatures or whatever, because that's a way that you can do it and still keep your mana up for your Revolt card, because you still have to cast the card. Another small note is that counters don't count as permanent. So like if you use up some energy counters, or if your creature loses a +1/+1 counter, that doesn't count as a permanent, just to be clear. So now that we've go ahead.
To be even clearer, token creatures do count as permanents.
Yes, so, totally.
Those are often represented by counters. So if you have a servo that's represented by a counter, that yes, a servo is in fact a permanent.
I hate it when people use like a die for a
yeah, because you can't represent it being tapped.
Yeah, I want to attack with that thing. Also, sometimes you just don't see it if it's like one of those. Anyway, so now that we've kind of, set the stage here for Revolt. How good is it? How good is the mechanic?
Well, it's not a very satisfying answer, but it depends on the cards it's on.
Yeah.
Because if you have cards that are like, 5 mana 3/3, but Revolt, draw 3 cards, like, okay, that's awesome. I don't think we're going to see Revolt triggers quite that swingy, but if you have really big Revolt triggers, then yeah, that gives you a lot of incentive to put implements or sacrifice cards in your deck to make chump attacks. One of the things that I think that's really cool about having this mechanic. See, Morbid was just not a huge part of Innistrad.
No.
And it ended up not really impacting the limited format all that much. But if Revolt is more pushed and more cards with it, then you've got a 3/3 out. Your opponent attacks with a 2/2. It's actually a lot of good bluffing potential because you're like, well, if I block, they might just want it to die, and then they're going to play their awesome Revolt card. So I guess I'll take 2, which means that if you have Revolt cards in your deck or you make your opponent to think you do, you could get some free attacks in.
And you're like, ha, 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 ha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And also, like, in terms of breadth, if there's a lot of the cards, then yeah, that gives you a reason to try to play more cards that self-sacrifice, because that's going to be the easiest way to get things going, most likely, because you have control over it. You're not going to want to build a Revolt deck, I would say, just hoping creatures die in combat, because if your opponent figures out what's going on, they're going to take steps to like make blocks that bounce and have nothing die, or make no blocks when they have the life total to take that.
Do you think, like, just on initial impression, do you see this as a build around type thing? From a deck building standpoint, where we want as many enablers and payoffs as possible, or is it going to be more like an occasional bonus that you'll try to set it up during the game, but you're not really trying to build towards it?
My guess is it's closer to just cards have this additional text, and sometimes it'll work.
That's how Morbid ended up playing out.
Yeah, you basically didn't end up going too deep on it before, and I don't think that's going to happen now. I mean, some decks you might play 3 implements and 5 Revolt cards and kind of be like, wow, I'm doing it. But most decks, I think, are just going to be like, well, I have this 3 mana 2/2 reach, and sometimes it'll draw me a card. There's a couple notes. One is it favors aggressive decks because those can force blocks more often. When you're at 20 on turn 6 and your opponent attacks you with a servo, you're like, whatever, I'll go to 19. When you're at 9 on by turn 5, and then your opponent's attacking their 2/2 into your 3/3, or better yet for the aggressive deck, attacking like multiple 2/2s into a 3/3 where you suicide a creature and then they take 4 damage and then they play the Revolt card. So aggro decks are going to utilize these cards better. And then the other thing is instant speed cards with Revolt are going to be a lot easier to trigger. Just from my experience playing with Brimstone Volley in Innistrad, it's very easy to keep mana up for an instant, and then if your opponent does anything or you do anything, something ends up dying. It's a lot easier to find a time when that Revolt's going to be active.
Do you anticipate that creatures dying in combat is the most common way that we're going to trigger these things?
Yeah, by far.
I think so too. Yeah. I was thinking about that in comparison to Morbid. I mean, how many times did you have a friend come up and say, dude, check out this sweet Morbid deck that I drafted in Innistrad?
Approximately really 0.
Yeah, probably 0, right? And so I wonder if we're going to have somebody come up and say, well, I built the Revolt deck. I did all this stuff.
Possible.
Yeah, I'm curious.
I just remember Moorcrypt Banshee. This is a 5 mana 4/4 Morbid, give a creature -4/-4.
Oh, that was like a solid B+ in the set review, and it went down a little bit. It was hard to get it going.
It was just a 5 mana 4/4 no text.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping Revolt hits a little higher than that. I think it will. I think that the cards are going to be more pushed and there's going to be more ways to trigger it.
Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. That is Revolt, though. Again, pretty straightforward mechanic. Just keep track of it because, maybe something happens in your first main phase or during combat, and then you've got kind of a complex set of decisions for the second main phase or after the dust is settled. And you want to remember if you've got Revolt, if that matters or not. Okay, so that brings us to...
Yeah, you can also bounce your own creatures too, like select for inspection or something along those lines. It's a lot more interesting.
Totally. And maybe we'll get even more as we see more of the set. Let's move on to Improvise. This is the other mechanic that we've got that's new. Improvise is a new ability that lets your artifacts help you cast your spells. It's pretty straightforward. Each artifact you tap when you cast a spell pays for 1 generic mana of the spell's mana cost. That's it. It's pretty easy. So I've got a couple of examples, and we'll get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty on it. One's called Sweatworks Brawler. It's 3 and a red for a 3/3 with Menace. It's a human artificer. A common. But it's got Improvise. And this is the other type of rule thing that we were talking about earlier. This just always means the same thing. Once you see Improvise, if you've memorized what the text says in the parentheses after it, then you just know exactly what it does. And what it says specifically is, your artifacts can help you cast this spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1 generic mana. So pretty straightforward. If you've got an artifact on the battlefield, you can tap it and it'll add 1 mana, but only to pay for this Sweatworks Brawler. The other one is called Foundry Assembler. It's 5 mana for a 3/3 with Improvise. So again, you can tap your artifacts to help cast it. So, well, the reason why they chose these two, by the way, for the first examples that we got to see of this, it will become apparent in a moment. So here's some things you need to know. First, you can tap artifacts that have entered the battlefield this turn, even if they're creatures. Summoning Sickness does not matter for Improvise. You cannot pay for any colored mana with the cost, with Improvise. You'll have to use non-Improvise sources of mana for that. So going back to our 2 examples, one of them costs 3 and a red. So you can reduce it all the way down to just the single red mana. But for Foundry Assembler, the one that costs 5 mana, you can actually cast it for free because it doesn't have a colored mana requirement. So keep that in mind. You cannot pay for the colored mana for that. Of course, this is just a clarification, but Improvise does not change when you can cast the spell. There's still, if it's a creature, it's still during your main phase. You know, it doesn't change anything as far as that goes. It's just change how you're paying for the spell. You can tap any type of artifact to pay for it. And that includes artifact creatures, equipment, artifact tokens like servos, vehicles, things like the implements that we talked about earlier, these sort of cheap artifacts that lay around. All of these things you can do it. So, and again, even your creatures can just tap, to go in, and even if they're summoning sick. One last note, Improvise doesn't change the mana cost or converted mana cost of the card. If you used Improvise, let's see, to pay for Sweatworks Brawler, and you use 3 artifacts and then just paid the red, you're not just paying 1 mana, you're still paying 4. It's just you're paying it in a different way. So the first thing that came to mind for this, Luis, and I'm really curious to get your opinion on this because, again, one of the things that I love about having you on the show is that you are a game designer by trade and, a longtime Magic player as well. So you really get this cross section of understanding what's going on kind of behind the mechanics of the set, but also seeing it from a Magic player perspective. And, speaking of playing for a long time, there used to be a mechanic called Affinity, that would also help you cast things for cheaper. And there's also just sort of a tradition of mana reduction mechanics being broken and not being fun and being dangerous for the game. Are you seeing any of that here with Improvise? Does this scare you at all?
Well, it doesn't for a couple reasons. One is I actually thought Affinity was pretty fun in Limited. I think that the problems with Affinity were constructed when every single land you put in your deck was an artifact land, and you got to play Arcbound Ravagers and Disciple the Vaults. Whereas in Limited, I think Affinity was actually really cool. It was one of the features of that set. Interesting. The big difference between Improvise and Affinity is Affinity, once you hit a threshold, you can just play like Frogmite, Mirror Enforcer, these all these Affinity creatures all in the same turn, whereas Improvise is still making you spend those resources, even if it's letting you use creatures that don't normally use those resources. So I see. Or provide those resources rather. So here, clues are one of the big things, like in Standard, for example, like you generate a bunch of clues and use those to improvise out creatures with Improvise. In Limited, like Cogworker's Puzzle Knot is a big one, two mana for 2 artifacts, essentially. I expect to see a decent amount of cheap artifacts in Aether Revolt to fuel Improvise, but because you're not dropping like multiple Sweatworks Brawlers in the same turn very often, because you do have to still tap those artifacts, it's a limit to how broken it can get. It does seem like it'd be pretty fun though, and I think strong. Like both the cards that we previewed here are not very many mana overcosted. Sweatworks Brawler actually is just not really overcosted. 4 mana, 3/3 menace is actually fine. And then Foundry Assembler, you probably want to pay 3 mana before you're starting to get a good deal. But like turn 2 Cogworkers Puzzle Knot, turn 3 Foundry Assembler doesn't sound like a bad curve to me.
No, that's pretty decent.
I assume there's going to be things similar to Cogworkers Puzzle Knot in the set. So like, yeah, you could end up, I think, in a pretty good spot here with these cards. And I wouldn't be surprised. Like, this is the sort of thing that screams out to me that there's going to be a deck you're going to build around. You're not going to be throwing improvised cards in your deck all that often. Like sometimes you might just throw 1 or 2 in, but you could definitely have 5 improvised cards and a bunch of ways to make cheap artifacts and just play cards under rate, which is pretty nice. Like, you know, you're playing turn 3 3/3 menaces, or you're playing like whatever. Like I'm sure there's like a 6/6 with improvise or something like that. You're playing that on turn 4 or whatever.
Yeah, and the other thing that can happen is it's not just about like, well, when do I get my 3/3 Foundry Assembler down? Like which turn is the earliest I can do it. It's also that sometimes like on turn 5, you play a creature, maybe it's an artifact, or you play a spell that gives you 2 artifacts, and then you combine it with the other artifacts you already had, and you also play the Foundry Assembler, right? That was the thing about Affinity that stood out, is that the things you were doing were very often not that broken, you know, vanilla 2/2s and 4/4s and stuff like that. But it was just that, you know, you could have these turns where you got to play multiple of those in the same turn and overwhelm your opponent. I'm curious to see if there's going to be kind of, you know, a turn where it's like, oh, they did the classic curve of, you know, this thing into this thing, which then lets them play this for free. You know, we saw this with Convoke, right? And this kind of reminds me of Convoke in a lot of ways. You know, in M15, I believe it was. And, you know, where there was, you know, people that would, you know, you would lead off with the 2-drop that made you 2/1/1s. And then, you know, and then on turn 3, you had this thing and everybody would kind of, you know, roll their eyes because it was like, oh, you had it. You know, you have all these 1/1s around and you can just convoke out these huge things. I'm curious to see if there's curves or card combinations that also line up so that you can do similar with Improvise.
And also because it doesn't require your artifacts to have been in play. The creatures don't have summoning sickness because of just how the rules work with tapping as a cost. You can string together turns where you're like, play a Fabricate that makes two tokens, immediately tap them to, you know, improvise out something. And that seems like it would lead to some pretty efficient turns.
Yeah, for sure. And you said you do think that this is a much more build around style mechanic where, you know, you take a bunch of anything that makes 2 artifacts or whatever and a bunch of improvised stuff and just try to kind of dump your hand on the battlefield.
Yeah, it sounds like something that if it's going to be present in large enough numbers, there's going to be enough enablers, and you're going to at the end of the day want to build an improvised deck, because if you don't, you just end up with a lot of somewhat inefficient creatures in your deck. Which is funny because that's like the opposite of improvising. You're actually like planning this. And you have all the tools.
Yeah, you are. The other question I had about Improvise was along the line. So one thing I didn't like about Convoke were the turns where people, you know, basically had a perfect curve out into more perfect curve out, and it just felt like you were overwhelmed. But one of the things I really did like about it was that if you were short on mana, if you were missing land drops or having issues with your mana, Convoke would let you still often be able to at least cast a couple of spells that you might not normally be able to. Just by, you know, maybe you cast a 2-drop and a 3-drop, but then you're stuck on 3 mana. But, you know, in Convoke world, you often had something like 5 mana available that you could use to cast different spells. Do you see this mechanic, Improvise, filling that role at all, where like it kind of gives you a break if you, you know, miss a land drop or something?
Yeah, you could definitely end up with, you know, keeping a 2-land hand, playing 1-drop artifact, 2-drop artifact, turn 3 just playing one of these improvised creatures, turn 4 play another improvised creature. I think that could work out. Okay,
so we'll see how it goes. I mentioned it earlier, but I wanted to note it again. There's no Fabricate in Aether Revolt, and you know, that was the first thing that came to my mind, is that, oh, I'll probably be making a lot more servos, you know, which I kind of did anyway, but you know, I even leaning harder in that direction. And we do have the 1 pack of Kaladesh, so it's not like you'll get 0, but you're not getting any.
You're going to make fewer servos, I think, because you're going to have fewer opportunities to make them.
Yeah. Okay. So you ran the numbers, and I'm going to make fewer. You are correct.
I did. You know, it's funny that this mechanic is very similar to ones we've seen before, and rules-wise not particularly complicated, but it has a lot more implications, I think, on drafting and deck building than the other mechanic in the set.
Yeah, that was my initial read on it too. I think it's going to be cool. I love curving out, being super mana efficient, and I think that that's going to be a big part of it with Improvise. Okay. So those are the two new mechanics. Again, what we were talking about, all the different cards, because of course the mechanics give us like an idea, and Luis and I can put our predictions forth, but it's really what's behind them. How powerful are these cards, especially the commons and uncommons that we're going to be seeing next week on the set review that are going to let us know, really, did they push these improvised cards? Are there some stupid things you can do, or is it just kind of a nice bonus? With Revolt, is it worth it to build around it? Or is it, again, just a nice bonus that you get occasionally? We'll find out a lot more about that next week.
My I guess to put a cap on it, my predictions are Revolt is going to be more of a like nice to have. You have a couple Revolt cards, maybe you try to enable them, but it's not a full deck, whereas Improvise is going to be much more like I drafted an Improvise deck. I think there's going to be a lot more support for Improvise just because of how the mechanic it works, whereas Revolt, I think, works just in a normal deck. You can put in 2 Revolt cards and they'll work fine.
So Revolt is basically like the LSV of this set, and Improvise is the Marshall. Is that roughly accurate?
No, that's not a very good analogy, but that sounds like one you would make.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right. Let's move on to our exclusive limited resources preview cards. We have 2 cards this time around, and boy, are they different than each other.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, how did we get these 2 cards? Like, I guess Blake just like threw some darts at a dartboard and was like, all right, here's what you got.
Well, I'll tell you what, we do get to talk about 2 completely different aspects of limited play. Now, they're both uncommons. The first one is called Winding Constrictor. It's black-green, so it's a gold card for only 2 mana. It's a 2/3 snake. So, assuming that you can cast this thing if you're in a black-green deck, a 2/3 for 2 mana is always a welcome addition and tends to perform quite well.
Yeah, it's a fine card.
Yeah, solid. But it's got some crazy stuff going on in the text box. So it says, if 1 or more counters would be placed on an artifact or creature you control, put that many of those counters plus 1 are placed on that counter instead. So
on that permanent.
On that permanent instead. Sorry. So I'll read that second clause again. That many of those counters plus 1 are placed on that permanent instead.
Basically, anytime you get counter, like a plus and plus 1 counter, you just get an additional one.
You get an additional one. It doesn't double it, but you get an extra one. And then it also counts for any type of counters, and also on artifacts, which is, it's charge counters or some weird stuff.
Yeah, it's mostly plus and plus 1 counters. That's going to be like 90% of what that does.
Mm-hmm.
But every now and then, you'll have a Dynavolt Tower that gets an extra counter.
Right, something like that.
Wait, no, Dynavolt Tower doesn't. That gives you energy. Dynavolt Tower still will give you extra off the second part of it.
It will.
It uses counters.
That's right. Yeah. So the second part is
it's really just plus and plus 1 counters and energy.
In this set, yeah, I think so, huh? Yeah. Anyway, so the second clause is if you would get 1 or more counters, you get that many of those counters plus 1 instead. And you being, of course, you, the player. And there's not too many instances where players get counters, but energy is one of them. You will be getting additional energy from the Winding Constrictor.
Poison, if you get
poison. That's right. And that's kind of brutal. The Winding Constrictor works against you, though.
This card would be sick in Modern, except for Infect. It's too much of a liability is the problem.
I agree, but you know what? It's a snake. Like, what is it supposed to do?
Make people more vulnerable to Infect.
It bites you. I don't know. It's like it turns on you.
In any case, this card seems like a pretty decent addition to the black-green counters archetype. If assuming that becomes more of a thing, and it just looks like a good value card, like you said, 2 mana, 2/3. You just play this and it'll be fine.
Yeah. The real question is, how many cards in the set help you abuse this card? And also, is black-green a color combo that you're happy to be in, or is this going to be more a card that you would look to splash? And then, of course, that begs that brings up the question: well, would you want to? Is this a card that you would actually like to splash?
I don't think I'm splashing this card. Like, I could see playing this in like a 3-color energy deck if you're really going deep on energy, but for the most part, this doesn't look like a splash card to me because you lose a lot of the mana efficiency that's already inherent as to the value of the card.
Yeah. And you're just so not often playing it on turn 2, and playing it on turn 2 as a 2/3 is part of the appeal of it. It's just a solid body, and you're not doing that very often. And if, at any point you have to cast your spells that get you those +1/+1 counters before you cast your Whining Constrictor, it's pretty sad.
You do have to play this card early just to get the text box to work and the power and toughness to work, and that's just not how splash cards work. But I do want to say that it's an additional decoction module for all your decoction module Whirler Virtuoso combos.
Oh, you saw that, did you? So you're playing the old Whining Constrictor into Whirler Virtuoso?
Oh, yeah. I'm in for that. I mean, Prophetic Prism. Can you imagine ever passing Prophetic Prism at this point?
I don't think I did anyway, to be honest. But yeah. Anyway, cool card. And then, just a quick note, beyond the scope of limited, it looks pretty cool too. Like there's a lot of stupid stuff you can do. I posted a picture of this on Twitter and just asked, for the people who play Commander, because, I don't really play Commander, I just said, you guys have to be busting this thing. And I got a lot of people saying, oh yes, I have 2 decks that's going right into, just piling up all those counters. So that's Whining Constrictor. Now, Whining Constrictor is a little more of the slow kind of, work our way up to some value, grind them out type thing. Our second card's a little more to the point. It's called Siege Modification. It costs 1 red. Again, it's an uncommon. It's an aura, and it enchants a creature or a vehicle. And it says, as long as enchanted permanent is a vehicle, it's also a creature in addition to its other type. So it means you no longer have to crew your vehicle. But it's also, of course, susceptible to sorcery speed removal and all the other things that come along with just being a regular old creature.
It just turns it into a creature forever.
Exactly. Which I think has ups and downs. Not having to crew it is a big deal. But also making it more vulnerable is tough too. Enchanted creature. This is where, whatever you put it on gets +3/+0 and first strike.
This card is so funny because it's actually good, I think. Like
it is so powerful. Like I hate cards like this, but my God, what a beating.
Yeah, I mean, auras in general we're always a little skeptical of, but in this particular case, I think Siege Modification is great because it just makes a creature into a must-kill threat that that is basically immune to combat. Like you put this on a 3/3, it's a 6/3 first strike. Like you're not beating that in combat.
Never.
So yes, a bounce spell or removal spell does, give you the same aura disadvantage, but this is still just turn something into a house, and also being able to put it on vehicles means that you just get to put this on your Renegade Freighter and just get in there. What I don't want people to do is decide that they're going to play a bunch of Demolition Stompers and the 1 mana 7/11 from even though I know I'm going to lose to that combo.
Oh, you're definitely losing to that. Yeah.
But Siege Modification seems like a pretty strong card. I mean, imagine putting this on a 2/2 and cracking in for 5. Your opponents can't really block it. They have to chump it and they take much damage. Like this looks like a very good card for an aggressive deck.
Yeah. The thing that you gain from this, especially if you're putting it on a vehicle, is not only do you get the big hit with the extra power that's coming in, the first strike makes it difficult to interact with in combat, but you also get this tempo advantage in that, people will be planning out the next turn and saying, okay, if you play a creature and crew your vehicle, I still have a block here. I've still got a block here, and I'll be all right. And instead, you play Siege Modification, and it is a much different scenario than what they had anticipated. And they probably don't have blocks under almost any circumstance. And they now have to contend with this thing. Again, high risk, high reward. If they do contend with this thing, you're in bad shape. You're just going to have a tough time coming back because Siege Modification is pretty expensive at 1 red. 3 mana is not super cheap, and also double red can be a little bit tricky. So, this is a high risk, high reward card for sure. The one thing that I kind of had to laugh at when I saw it though was like, what vehicles are you blocking anyway? Like most of the vehicles just smash. There's a card in the set that gives vehicles flying, and somebody was going, oh my God, this is so insane. And I'm just like, it's fine. Like it's a decent card, but like vehicles were made to not be blocked. Like your blocks against them were
built
terrible.
To smash, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. And, so I don't know that you get so much on that, but the truth is that the 3 powers a lot, and it makes your, whatever you put it on, like you said, even just a lowly 2/2, but God forbid a Renegade Freighter or something like that, something that they can't ignore. and that has to be dealt with. And I do like that part of it where, yes, you are kind of conceding the fact that if they do deal with it, you're at a severe disadvantage. But if they don't, they probably lose. And I do like the aspect of saying, well, if you're going to ask me a question, make it a really big, scary question, like, whatever's under your siege modification, and make me answer it within a turn or two, because, not everybody has a removal spell around. And, combining this with trample especially just seems particularly savage, as ultimately, if there are enough servos or dispensable creatures lying around and you put this on a normal creature, it can be chump blocked for some period of time, and that could buy them enough time to find an answer for the siege modification. I don't think the card's great. I think it's fine. I think the power level's there. This type of card that I like to dismiss. I like to be like, nah. And I'm closer to that than not. But at the same time, when they push it this far, you got to respect it. You're going to lose games to this card sometimes because it is such a big swing for the aggressive deck, for sure. Also, I guess you could make a sweet blocker with it.
Yeah, probably don't want to do that.
Why?
Basically, because you're getting 2 for 1 if you do that, because you're leaving back a blocker with an aura and they can just not attack into it.
Oh, yeah, sure. But I mean, I'm saying, look, obviously you'd prefer to be attacking, but in a pinch, this doesn't have a clause that says you have to attack, right?
True.
And sometimes you keeping your creature back.
Creatures with this, I suppose.
Yeah.
The most promising use of this is just getting 1 big hit in an aggressive deck. So even if your opponent then removes it on their turn, if you got 6 damage through, you probably are happy enough with that.
Yeah, for sure.
I am liking the idea of selecting for inspection. It's like, looks like you've got some illegal modifications going on there.
Yeah, I like that. That's good flavor when that has to be somewhere in the Sunset Show or something like that for the next one. That's pretty good. Or maybe we'll do a sign off for it or something, because that completely passes inspection, as it were. I think we really broke it though with the blocking siege modification.
Oh
plan.
yeah. That is. I will say right now that the achievement that everyone's going to be going for is playing the 1 mana 7/11 Crew 6 vehicle and putting siege modification on it. Obviously that's what everyone's going to do.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the whole joke, right?
Yeah,
so,
that is it, right? Because that's just a 2-turn. Does that thing have trample or anything?
It does not. So you've got a 10/11 first strike, which is obviously just ludicrous stats, but no trample means it's not unbeatable.
But it is attacking turn 3?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, select for inspection is starting to look pretty good, because that's about the scariest thing I've ever heard. All right. Well, there's our 2 cards. Curious to see where they end up fitting in. Again, they're both on 2 very opposite.
Do you think we got these 2 cards because Wizards R&D thinks this is a combo that you play the one Victor and then you put the siege modifications on it?
No, I don't think that they were trying to lead us down that particular rabbit hole. I mean, you're the one who wants to play Whining Constrictor into what's it
Whirler
called?
Virtuoso?
Yeah, the old black-green into blue-red. Can you even do that? Let me think. You need Aether Hub? Aether Hub? No, that doesn't work. No.
No, I don't think you can actually.
I mean,
you need a rares. If you have some of the rare dual lands, right? You have Botanical Sanctum or something like that. You could do that.
Okay. All right. You figured it out, and I'm sure you'll do it on your stream at some point for us. Okay. Well, that's going to do it. We've got a little bit of a shorter show this week, just because we only had the 2 preview cards and there's only 2 new mechanics, and frankly, they're pretty straightforward. And like I said, we prefer to keep these direct and to the point, give you the information you need, but not overload you with too much going into the big set review next week, which of course,
Yeah, I have
for already.
I have no guilt about having a shorter show given our next 2 weeks of shows.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna say the average is still pretty high.
Yes, yeah, and I'm ready. I'm getting there. I'm rubbing my hand. I've been looking at all the cards that have been coming out and trying to get my thoughts together for them. But of course, we'll have that for you next week. We'll have the video version on the YouTube channel, as well as the audio version here for those of you looking forward to Aether Revolt. I know that Luis and I are both looking forward to it, and we'll see you then. If you want to find us on social media, it's easy. I'm Marshall_LR. And Luis is LSV. You can come on Twitter and say hi. You can also send us an email, lr@lrcast.com. If you have something a little more substance behind it, more than 140 characters, feel free to fire us off an email there. I want to remind you that the show is brought to you by channelfireball.com. Make sure you get on Channel Fireball and get your Aether Revolt all pre-ordered so that you can get it in the mail as soon as possible and get those drafts going. Remember, you're going to be doing 2 packs of Aether Revolt and 1 pack of Kaladesh for your drafts, and the sealed should be and usually is 4 packs of the new set. So in this case, Aether Revolt and then 2 of Kaladesh. So if you do end up getting some sealed product from Channel Fireball, make sure that if you're out of Kaladesh, you pick up a couple of extra boosters for that so that you can do the real format. You wouldn't want to forget. And of course, if you need something to fund that, you can sell your cards back to CFB and they'll give you a healthy bonus for trading them in for store credit. And of course, you can use those to get those boosters and such. So please do check them out, channelfireball.com. That is going to do it for the show this week. Next week, big set review. We'll see you then.
So closing out the new year and beginning, or rather last year and beginning the new year, I realized that this year's libbys have yet to be awarded.
Oh, the libbys.
The libbys are back.
I forgot about the libbys.
The libbys are our end of year / beginning of next year. Living Resources Awards. And let's get to it.
Okay. Libbys. What do we got?
Top, the worst grade of the year goes to Midnight Oil. That was very clearly.
The crowd goes wild.
Our biggest miss.
Indeed.
Yeah, we did not give this a particularly accurate grade. Our best grade, I believe, goes to Reduce to Ashes. The reason I picked this card was less the actual grade and more that we use this as an example of a very mediocre removal spell that people seem to like a lot. And I think we were a lot more accurate than I think the public at large based on how people tended to treat the card. So,
all right. Reduce to Ashes making the comeback.
Yeah. So I think that was actually one of our better moments. Mm-hmm. Moving on to the most valuable contributor for the second year in a row, Owen Turnwald.
Wow. Congratulations. Wait, he beat you and I somehow? What is
We're not eligible for most valuable contributor. We're the co-hosts.
Ah, I see. So I didn't win a Limmy this year is what you're saying.
We'll see.
Wait, I thought I wasn't. Okay, sure.
Owen won this for not only showing up for the set review. He did set reviews for Eldritch Moon.
Eldritch Moon, I believe. Yeah.
Yes. He also was the most used guest host. He was on 3 episodes total this year, and
he smashed it every time too.
Episodes. So yeah. Owen, running away with it 2 years in a row as the most valuable contributor. Owen Turnwald. The most valuable contributor sign-off category. Last year it was Shahar Shenhar for his wealth of awesome stories.
Yeah.
Which I'm building up the cache of, by the way. Those aren't done yet.
All you have to do is hang out with them and the cache just starts flooding over.
Oh, yeah. But this year, the winner for most valuable contributor sign-offs was random old set packs. Because the Let's Stump Vargas sign-off was something that has been repeated multiple times to, I would say, reasonable success. So,
and it will be as well going forward. Let's Stump Vargas is here to stay. And I've even got a few old packs. And thank you, by the way, to everybody who donated those packs. Those were given to me at GPs and stuff as like, hey, maybe you'll find some reason for this old Tempest pack or whatever. I'm like, cool. And then, but it's like hard to find a spot. But Let's Stump Vargas, that's where they belong.
Moving on to most valuable episode, I chose 335 Heuristics. Because I think that's one of the more timeless episodes and one that has a lot of relevance both within and without Magic. I think Heuristics is just a powerful tool. And that is, I would say, going forward, the most valuable episode of the year. The
runner-up, though, the one that we got lots of feedback that was really good was the How to Approach Gaming in Life.
Yes, those are very similar, actually.
Yes.
Because the episodes that I think we tend to like the most are the ones that have more application than just winning games of Magic. Because as awesome as winning games of Magic are, I mean, there's just a lot more going on. And, figuring out a good life philosophy, I think, is pretty important.
All right.
So see, like I said, you're not left out in the cold here. The tallest co-host category won 2 years in a row. Marshall Sutcliffe.
Yes!
You're still the tallest co-host.
I have not been upended.
Neither co-host has changed. We're both the same people, and you're still taller than me. So You're
I'll
locked
take
for
it.
this category until the day where I get replaced by someone taller.
By either Huey or Matt Tabak.
Yeah.
Or Nate Holt. Nate Holt also. Yeah.
Potentially. Best card name. The Libby goes to Wiley Bandar for multiple reasons. One, Wiley is a cool adjective.
Mm-hmm.
The other is Bandar is a cool word for monkey, which I did not know.
Yes.
And also it's an ape. So
it's not an ape, it's a monkey.
Yeah.
It's a cat monkey.
It is a cat monkey. That is true.
And also, thanks to our listener, Shivam Bhat, he told us that Bandar, it means ape or monkey. And so now I've got the Bandar binder.
Right. That's why Wiley Bandar is the winner for best card name.
Definitely has a lot going for it.
Best set. The Limmy goes to Kaladesh. I think Kaladesh is just the best set of the year by, actually, I would say a wide margin in terms of how much I enjoyed it for limited. So
me too. I drafted it all the way up until the Vintage Cube. That was the only thing that could tear me away from it.
And Vintage Cube is obviously just going to crush anything in its path.
Right.
The Swedish archetype, 3-color energy in Kaladesh.
Absolutely.
It has a lot of different stuff going on, a lot of different ways you can build it, a lot of different ways you can get into it, different colors you can await it, even though if it was blue-green a lot of the time. So 3-color energy was just, I think, a real treat to draft.
I really appreciate that the panel behind the Limmys chose a real archetype too, and didn't do something silly like, Aether Flux Reservoir or something like that.
It was nominated, but ultimately the panel went a different way.
Kudos for the panel.
The worst archetype is Blue-White Tempo in Oath of the Gatewatch. This was not a deck, basically. It was the cards looked like they were there. Each color pair was something in Oath, and Blue-White Tempo or Blue-White Flyers just didn't work. It was just one of the least successful archetypes, I believe. Mm-hmm. Which is funny because the Limmy for Best Manowar does go to Reflector Mage.
Yes!
Reflector Mage is by far the best Manowar of the year, despite the fact that Blue-White Tempo was the worst archetype. Turns out you can splash Reflector Mage in a lot of different decks.
Wow, Reflector Mage was this year, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Crazy. From Oath of the Gatewatch.
Yep. The sweetest build-around award goes to Epitaph Golem.
Whoa! Right. Did not expect that.
Stuff, and then using Epitaph Golem to infinitely recurse a removal spell until all your opponent's creatures were dead. I mean, there's just nothing better. So Epitaph Golem definitely was the award for sweetest build-around.
The panel went a little deep on that, but sure, we'll take it.
The most disappointing build-around, the Limmy goes to Trail of Evidence. This is the 2 and a blue enchantment. Whenever you play an instant or sorcery, you get a clue. And the reason that this was the most disappointing was there just was no deck that could ever really use this. There was no real way to utilize it. So in a set full of awesome build-arounds, this one did not deliver.
No, it didn't.
And the final Limmy is the category is most controversial addition to the show. That Limmy goes to LSV's wildly unbalanced sound levels.
No, come on, man. You don't need to do that. We had a sound issue on the last episode. I've addressed it. I know it's God. Also, it wasn't controversial at all. It was just universally panned.
Well, given all the arguments that you're making right now, it sounds controversial. It sounds correct. So the Limmy does go to my wildly unbalanced sound levels, which, as everyone knows, clearly aren't my fault. So that is this year's Limmys, and we'll be back next year.